Hello, and welcome to the Iaconian Archives. I am the archivist, your host and reader. In this episode, I will be sharing an excerpt from Light, Darkness by author Sophisticated Adult, a tale of finding one's Sparkmate in the Shattered Glass universe. So pour yourself a glass of nightmare fuel, get comfortable at your console or in your berth, close your optics, and let's enter the archives. Nyan was at the same time alien and familiar. He'd never personally set foot in the city, an industrial hub that traded the cold wind from the Rust Sea for an omnipresent, suffocating heat. It had a fierce, independent streak that he respected more than he did Zeta's reports on minor woes and failings to keep the workers in line. No one lingered on the smoggy streets, each and every mech being someone with somewhere to be. The to and fro hurrying, couriers and delivery mechs dodging around hulking laborers. It all so strongly reminded him of the docks he'd once worked on. As faceless and indistinguishable from the next mech, it gave him a certain nostalgia watching their movements as Zeta aimed him towards whatever factories and forges would give the best impression. Optimus did not pay attention to his boasts of records hit and costs cut, instead turning inwards. Close. His spark was practically thrumming with excitement, one he couldn't even blame on the other, this time, unless you counted this whole sorry situation in the first place. Turning abruptly, he marched out of the factory, only vaguely aware of Zeta's yelp and hurried footfalls. His path led him a few streets over, the sky darkening as the buildings closed in above. He reached what must be one of the forges, a blistering heat emerging from the entrance, the street itself warm beneath his feet. Sir, Zeta ventured, but made no attempt to stop him as Optimus swept inside. Internal warnings started to ping in his HUD as the heat went from sweltering to being its own wall of pressure. But still there was noise and motion as molten metal was guided and cast. "Who's in charge here?" Zeta demanded, grabbing a mini who'd been hurrying past them, sweeping him right off his feet and bringing him up to glare directly into his optics. Whatever the answer, Optimus ignored it, optics roving around the busy scene, restlessly seeking out. "Can I help you, Gentlemax?" The little mech returned with one only a head taller, barely coming up to Optimus's knees. But he had a sense of calm, of control amidst the organized chaos that was all too familiar to those who knew it. A foreman, one who knew what he was doing. "We're just looking," Zeta fumbled, caught out. Optimus's focus had narrowed to one mech, towards the back, where the metal was still in the process of being melted down. "What's that one doing?" Optimus asked, intently studying the grimy mech, covered in ash and soot like the other workers. Although bigger than the foreman, he was still small, having to lean up in order to reach into one of the vats with a kind of ladle, which he used to scoop out glowing, solid-looking chunks from the molten metal. These were tossed onto a pile where they cooled quickly. "Oh, that's one of the skimmers, sir," the foreman said, eager to provide an answer. "Takes out the slag, impurities in the metal, so it don't get mixed in when it gets cast." "Impurities," Optimus murmured. His Sparkmate was a fast worker and, to the optics of one unacquainted with his line of work, skilled at it, easily braving the heat to reach into the crucible with practiced movements. The foreman shrugged. "Gets rid of the garbage you don't want in the first place, like dirt and such, since we're dealing with scrap, and it separates different kinds of metal from each other, so's we know what we're working with." The little mech was doing a much better job of keeping under pressure than Zeta ever did in his presence, seeming unworried at the Supreme Prime's unexpected appearance in his little foundry. "How long is his shift for?" Optimus asked. Both Zeta and the foreman's EM field snapped with confusion and surprise, but the little mech rallied first. "A few more cycles yet." Catching the sudden cooling of the area, even in this all-consuming heat, he quickly added, "Or, well, whenever you want, sir." "Get him cleaned up," Optimus ordered, turning to Zeta. "I need to see him in a private room." Optimus sat primly in a back office that had been hastily located and cleaned out. still dusty from disuse and merely mildly warm. He approved reports from Prowl and requisition requests from Ultra Magnus, frowned at a news headline about the latest Decepticon activity in Tarn, a supposedly secret rally all but held out in the open. And Zeta thought he had problems? His Spark noticed the approach before he did, and he shut off and subspaced the datapad. A second later, the door opened, revealing the mech Optimus had singled out as his Sparkmate. If nothing else, he cleaned up nicely, though there were still patches that had been missed, including a black smudge on his cheek that had only been half swiped away. Despite this, Optimus took a moment to appreciate the figure. It was meant for him, after all, and the worn and dulled paint couldn't hide the lean, curved frame. His Sparkmate looked him up and down once, then spoke without prompting, dropping down into an office seat that creaked and groaned in protest despite his light stature. Figures, guess it makes sense you're an Autobot. Why is that? Optimus raised an optical ridge. His Sparkmate's impressive pair of sweeping yellow spoilers were slumped down, and his visor was raised to reveal a bright pair of blue optics. He shifted back in the chair before answering. Well, I thought you hated me. You blocked me out on day one, fought me at every turn. Folks said Autobots get weird about Sparkmates, so I guessed you bought into their slag. His Sparkmate wrapped his arms around himself, but still met Optimus's optics, some mix of pity and resentment and curiosity bubbling underneath. I mean, why are you even here? Why now? That was when Optimus realized there was an utter lack of reaction, of recognition. His Sparkmate had no idea he was speaking to the Supreme Prime. This has gone on long enough. Optimus stood, hands flexing, but he'd kept thinking about what the foreman had said, removing impurities. He'd taken in Sunstreaker and Sideswipe at an older age than this, when they were half feral and operating almost entirely on combat programming. He'd personally shaped Prowl and Jazz into the mechs they were today. It seemed such a waste now to kill the mechs standing fearlessly before him. There was no shame in adjusting your stance once new information came to light. Come with me to Iacon. The words were out of his mouth before he even thought them. But yes, this was right. The little mech stepped back, confusion wrinkling on his faceplate. That's for Autobots and their stooges. I'm no bot. He tapped his flame-painted chest proudly. This whole faction business is dumb. We're all just mechs in the end. Fascinating, Optimus indulged him, opening the door for them both. Perhaps we can discuss this further in the transport. Hey, I didn't say yes, his mate protested, but still followed him out, turning sideways through the door to stop his expansive spoiler clipping on it. Can I at least get your name? If I have yours first. Sure, his mate walked side by side, head held proudly. Name's Hot Rod. Optimus made a non-committal noise. It suited him, he supposed. His mate would know his identity soon enough. For now, Optimus was curious as to the sorts of things he would say before he knew exactly who he was saying it to. All in all, things could have turned out worse. You can find this story posted in its entirety at archiveofourown.org, along with nearly 40,000 original Transformers transformative works. Give it a read and let the author know what you thought. Comments and kudos encourage authors to keep producing their art. Please share this channel with other Transformers enthusiasts. Subscribe and you'll know when new videos are posted. As always, comments and suggestions are welcome below. If you would like to suggest a story for reading here on the Iaconian Archives, please view our video From the Archivist, suggesting content, and you could hear me read some of your favorite Transformers fanfiction. From tonight's author and myself, thank you for your time and support.